In its golden era, Rover was one of the most innovative and engineering-focused car makers in Europe and was renowned for making cars with flair and style like the P6.
But come the 1980s, the Viking was owned by cash-strapped and red-tape-tangled British Leyland, and they were knocking out cars that were rather more rebadged Japanese cars like the 800 here. Is this a true Rover? Is it a good car? And is it even worthy of wearing that Viking badge on the front? We're going to take this P6 3500 and this 827 Coupe for a drive and find out. But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So click the link below at the end of the video to enter their latest competition.
So here we are, Joe, in the frankly magnificent Rover P6.
Indeed, we've certainly picked the weather for it. It's a lovely British summer day out there.
It is, but it's a good day to be in a Rover because, of course, the whole point of a P6 is that it is a solid Rover that will keep the British weather at bay and it sets new standards.
Rover had that reputation for solidity and good engineering, but obviously the sort of increasingly affluent middle-class younger buyer of the 1950s and early 60s, they didn't want a big car like their dad had had.
Yes, in practice, on the production line, this replaced the P4. Really, it was a whole different sort of car because the market for the P4 was kind of disappearing. That big, very solid, very expensive car.
Yeah.
So they were looking for something that was better than a standard family saloon, not a full-on sports saloon, which was quite expensive to buy and quite expensive to run, and not a big 3-litre barge like an Austin Westminster or something like
and
that.
Crucially, then you start looking at European rivals like the Lancia Flavia and, of course, the Citroen DS.
Yes.
So it had to satisfy so many different
It did.
things. So as a result, they threw their engineering might at this car, didn't they?
I think this is what's so great about the P6 is it absolutely embodies what Rover was at its best when it was in its golden age in the 60s, an independent company, and you genuinely could use the word Rover in the same breath as Citroen or Lancia or NSU.
You only have to look at some of the engineering. For a start, much like the Citroen DS, it's a base unit. It's just a skeletal structure. Every single body panel you can see, including the roof, is effectively cosmetic.
Yes.
Because all the strength is kept low down, it's kept rigid.
Foreseeing the big push towards automotive safety in the late 60s, the P6 was already there almost 10 years before. So it had crumple zones, impact absorbent dashboard,
even a collapsible steering column.
Collapsible steering column.
And it was an advanced car to drive as well, wasn't it? I mean, it had all-round disc brakes, inboard at the rear.
Inboard, again, very, very Citroen-esque.
The Dion tube rear suspension, which of course that keeps the rear wheels parallel, which means they don't camber in like a Triumph Herald or anything like that, keeps it very level, keeps it balanced. But of course the rear suspension was nothing compared to the front suspension, the bell crank.
Yes, so a bit like a big overgrown Citroen 2CV. The front coil springs are horizontal and they're braced up against the bulkhead, which is where all the strength is.
That was to give maximum real estate in the engine bay for the other trailblazing feature of the P6.
The one which unfortunately never happened. Designed by having a gas turbine, worked on for many years. There was a sort of gas turbine prototype car that looked vaguely like the P4, the famous Jet 1. And Rover really were seeing the future of the gas turbine for its smoothness and its power to weight ratio. And unfortunately, the economics of it never stacked up for actually putting it in a car.
But gas turbine stuff aside, this was still a hugely technically impressive car, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Rover really flexed its muscles. And it did get some muscle of sorts.
Muscle and how, yes. Yeah, the gas turbine work did end up paying off because, as we said, the whole point of that weird front suspension was to make the engine bay as wide as possible. It meant it was really easy to drop the ex-Buick 3.5 litre V8 engine in.
And it's a gem of an engine.
It really is.
3.5 litres, aluminium, 160 horsepower. Go on, let's sample a little bit of that now.
So even in something as refined as this, this isn't a sports saloon. You can hear that lovely V8 burble.
The whole car is lovely.
Oh yeah.
What's it like to drive with that clever suspension and so on?
We've talked about the Citroen DS. This genuinely has a Citroen rivaling ride quality. Lots of humps and bumps in it where the tarmac's settled on the road and it just floats along.
Beautiful. The DS is not a handling car.
No.
But this punches above its weight.
It is more of a handling car than the DS is. Again, it's not sporty. There's quite a lot of body roll, but it's very well contained.
It combines ride and handling in a way that modern cars just can't.
Yeah.
It's composed and it's comfortable and it's relaxing. It's at the point where if you were sat here reading a book, at no point would you look up with concern. It's such a well-gathered set of engineering achievements. Even things like the 4-cylinder engine was designed to be as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
In fact, it was square. The bore and the stroke is the same to make it as smooth as possible. This is a fantastic.
They are. I love these. I think they are a brilliant car in themselves and they are, for me, a brilliant Rover. They absolutely sum up what Rover, when it was an independent company, not just a badge of a bigger company.
And the amount of stuff that worked, it's almost Lancia-ish in its way.
It really is.
Just kind of pioneering, evolving the car beyond one specific model.
The P6 sold really well.
322,000
Indeed.
sold. And here's one for you, it won the first ever European Car of the Year award.
It did, exactly.
This car was a beacon of hope.
Exactly.
It showed what we could do as a nation. I mean, even sat in here now, look at this dashboard, this big swooping dash, these lovely bits of wood. It's got that jet age feel to it.
It is, but again, it's that brilliant mix of the old and new. It is very jet age. And
when you look at so many aspects of this car, the engine and the suspension and the safety and the construction and the interior and the comfort and the whole package and how it appealed to everyone, not just Brits.
Yep.
This is just a magnificent piece of engineering.
It is, and really, I think I would not be going too far to say that if you are in the mind where you appreciate something like a Citroen DS, but you're worried about all the hydraulic high-tech, I think a P6 would be for you.
I agree, and I think it could be for me. I'm sort of find myself wanting one. So I think we can agree that this was Rover at its absolute best.
We can,
but
absolutely.
Of course, Jack, come the 1980s, things were different.
Things had gone slightly downhill. The Longship was taking on a bit of water, shall we say.
Let's go and captain that very boat on this slightly rainy day and see what the 800 is all about. Of course, Jack, from those halcyon days of the P6, by the 1980s, Rover's fortunes had turned a little bit.
To put it mildly, yes, they had.
They were owned by British Leyland, they were cash-strapped, they were time-strapped, they were throttled by near-constant strikes from the workforce. How could you ever hope to produce a new executive car to be a spiritual successor to that P6? Obviously, they had the SD1 in the gap there, and that looked every bit as modern as the P6, but of course, underneath was totally conventional. It was quite old school, in fact.
Many people at the time thought the SD1 was a bit of a step backwards engineering-wise, but it was very well engineered.
That was getting a bit dated by the mid-80s. It was time for something new. Rover didn't really have the time or the money or the resources to do something all new.
Indeed not.
But after the success of the Triumph Acclaim, which was of course effectively a badge engineering exercise with Honda, the Ballade, why not do the same for your big executive car?
Well, it's an interesting one because, of course, Honda didn't make big executive cars.
No, that was the other thing. So both parties had something to gain. Rover would get their new spiritual successors of the SD1 P6, and Honda would get a true big executive car to do well in Europe and hopefully America.
Of course, Honda knew going into the deal that they were doing a deal with, if not the company, certainly the people and the institutional knowledge that had delivered the P6, as well as all the other stuff in the BL back catalogue. And Honda were looking to learn how to adapt their products more for the European market and particularly the more upscale. Definitely a two-way street. It wasn't just Honda, okay, Rover, we'll teach you how to build a car.
There was something to gain from both parties.
Indeed.
So we were going to get the Rover 800 to sit kind of notably above the 200, which by now was also Honda Ballade derived. Yep. Honda, meanwhile, would get the Legend, of course. The car was co-developed at Rover's Cowley plant and Honda's plant, so both companies had a part to play. But crucially, the cars, while they'd be the same platform, they'd be the same underneath, so there wouldn't be any bell crank suspension or anything like that. They would be unique for the Rover and the Honda in the bits that you saw and that you touched and felt. So the exteriors and the interiors would be unique. The mechanicals would even be different as well. So Honda would provide the V6 engine, which we've got in this car, the 2.7. Rover would supply 4-cylinder petrol engines, and rightly or wrongly, a lot of the electrics.
Yes, which is obviously where those who are familiar with Rover 800s will start making noises like that.
Gordon Sked was brought in to do the aerodynamic design. He wanted something that would cut through the air neatly. I think he smashed it out of the park.
Yes, I think particularly the original 86, I think it's a really good styling job.
Very handsome car.
Very handsome, and you can see the progression from the SD1, aerodynamics and those clean shapes definitely in, and I think the 800 absolutely looked the part.
Inside, it was very determined that whilst the Honda would be very Japanese, very functional, grey plastics, grey buttons, the Rover would give you more of a luxury feel, a more traditional British.
Yes.
And you know what? In this Mark II version, you really can feel like you've got nice touches of wood, you've got your cream leather, chrome here and there.
The aesthetic is absolutely fine. I think the moment you start actually touching things rather than just using your eyes is when I think the 800 starts to...
I don't know what you mean.
I was going to say the Rover 800 starts to fall apart, and that was a figure of speech. That Rover P6 we were driving earlier felt solid and is, what, over 50 years old?
This car is 30 years its junior.
Did the P6 have a dashboard that had collapsed and gone crinkly?
Rover wanted to use McPherson strut suspension because that's kind of the accepted way of making a big comfortable car, but Honda insisted on double wishbones because that's better for handling, and Honda won out, would you believe?
And again, front wheel drive, the first front wheel drive big Rover.
You can tell in a corner like this, if I chuck it in, it's wallowy. There's no nice way of putting it. It's not composed. It's not like the P6 where it accounts for itself. And if I just move the... Yeah.
Being a Honda suspension, it means it has relatively short travel. To give it the Rover ride without becoming the typical Honda joltiness, it's got very soft damping. Short suspension travel and soft damping just leads to, on roads like this, a little bit of a mess.
When you're just cruising along, it's nice, and when you're up to speed, it floats along nicely. It's a comfortable car. However, the 800 is perhaps the only car I've ever driven that manages to be crashy and yet wallowy.
Indeed. A car that's really good cruising in straight lines, can't get around the corners. I think we should probably mention that the Series 2 800 particularly was almost tailor-made to be sold in the American market.
They designed it with this coupe body,
Yep.
and they even launched the Mark 1 in America,
They
badged
did.
as a Sterling, not as a Rover. In 5 years, they sold 36,000.
Fairly dire sort of warranty recall problems, didn't they?
The reliability and the quality was diabolical. Mostly electrics, thanks Rover. They pulled out of America, having developed this coupe for America before the coupe was even released. They facelifted it. They gave it the iconic Rover grille
Yep.
for the P4. It came back, and you know what? I think it suits this car. I think it works with its chiselled lines. For the Saloon, they wanted as much to carry over as possible to keep the tooling costs
Yep.
down. However, by 1991, all the tooling was flogged out. So they still had to spend out to buy new tooling anyway. So they committed to keeping it relatively similar to the Mark 1, when actually they were no better off from a financial point of view.
Yeah, millions of pounds to make a car that looked like the one that's just replaced. That just sums up sort of the mess that Rover got itself into in this era, and trying to be a bit Jag, a bit retro, and yet very modern. Rather like how we said, the suspension doesn't work. The styling is kind of modern, but not really modern, not as avant-garde as the P6, and equally it's not as traditional. I struggle with the 800. It's trying to be too many things at once.
There must be a bit of you that can appreciate the qualities of this car. It's more charming than a Honda is. There's a bit more character to the interior. I mean, this engine is just...
The engine,
just
the
glorious.
engine is an absolute gem. It is.
2.7 V6, Honda double overhead cam, is I believe related to the engine in the NSX.
But I would rather it was in
But
a Honda.
just listen, beautiful. All right, there's a bit of body roll. All right, I'll
And that almost proves my point. You try to enjoy the Honda engine, and the dynamics that were done by Rover just
all
get
right.
in the way. Here's
Come
a straight
on,
bit.
just enjoy this V6.
No, it makes a great noise.
Come on.
It makes a great noise.
But there's no torque low down. It doesn't.
No,
the gearbox is slushy, and it redlines at nearly 7,000. This isn't the kind of car I want to be revving into 7,000.
That's almost double what the V8 and the P6 would have usefully topped out at. A lot of commonality between the classic Rover way of engineering and the classic Honda way of engineering, which is why that double act works so well. I think here they were probably still finding their feet. Rover input into what was fundamentally still a majority Honda project. The R8, which was a genuine collaboration from scratch, they nailed that.
The 800, I will be the first to admit, they hadn't quite worked out how much to give and how much to take.
Yeah.
There are lots of individual things about it that are great. The look and feel of the interior, the engine, the comfy ride.
Somehow less than the sum of its parts.
We're going to say it was so close. And
Yeah,
yet so far. And let's not forget, it lived a 13-year life.
It
They
did,
sold
yeah.
400 odd thousand of these cars, so it still did well for itself. So you're very definitely in the P6 camp.
Absolutely, and I'm afraid I cannot see anything that would drag me out of it.
I love that P6. If truth be told, I think it's magnificent. It's one of the only cars that can hold a candle to a DS. But I do like the 800, but there is a real likeable charm to it for having a go. And I think, as we have borrowed both these cars from our man Peter Simpson,
Yep.
from Classic and Vintage Commercial, thank you Peter, you could justify owning both.
They complement each other perfectly.
What a great pairing. For as much as I haven't convinced you, I've at least justified it to you.
You have. You've done a marvellous job of being a defence lawyer.
Well, why don't you let us know in the comments which Rover takes your fancy, the P6 or the 800? Yes, we know which way this is probably going, but I'd like to remind you, if you weren't already convinced, P6 doesn't sound like that.
It doesn't.
This video is proudly sponsored by Lancaster Insurance. Give them a call on 01480 400 889 for an insurance quote on your classic car. And don't forget to click the link below to enter their latest competition.